If Jim Chisholm or Jim Simmons can hear me, I guess everyone can.
What?
Welcome. I want to welcome all of you to what may be the first ever type of this type of a show that we have here in the Wayne Historical Museum. We would like you to all realize, of course, that this is your museum. The commission is only here to see to it that the things keep rolling, and that's what we're trying to do for you this evening, to show you some of the things that are available here in the museum that we couldn't possibly put on permanent exhibit at all times. Now there are some, and you'll notice the last 3 pages in your booklet, there are hats there described that you'll find in the showcases, on the models, and so forth, that are here on permanent display. Also, some of them up in the upper level. And we hope that you would take the time sometime, either tonight or sometime in the future, if you'd come by and look things over more or less at your leisure. I've got a little ditty here that we found in the file, and it says, tying her bonnet under her chin, she tied her raven ringlets in. But not alone in the silken snare did she catch her lovely floating hair, for tying her bonnet under her chin, she tied a young man's heart within. In the spring, a young man's fancy lightly turns to thoughts of love, according to Tennyson. Perhaps an older man's thoughts may turn to spading the garden, or to Return of the Tigers from the spring training. At the first hint of spring, except in the last few years, of course, a woman's thoughts, young or old, turn to the new spring hat styles, maybe even to the Easter parade. We don't know when the first milliner appeared in Wayne or who she was. Milliners were first mentioned in Wayne directories in 1873, when Morrison and Hall milliners appeared. Who were they? James Morrison, a shoemaker, came to Wayne about that time. Was it his wife or his daughter that was a milliner? I think that I know that one of his daughters, maybe his only daughter, was a shoe store owner and also a treasurer of the village. A Miss Underwood, sometimes known as Annie, was a milliner in the 1870s and until 1882. And in 1875, a Mrs. Simpson was listed. 4 milliners were shown in 1877. They were Mrs. O.M. Baker, Mrs. Rosanna Greening, Mrs. Kate Steers, and Mrs. Ann Vining. Mrs. Vining was the mother of Estelle Bunting, who would have been 13 in 1877. Mrs. Bunting was always known for her interest in hats. She used to have her hats made at Irving's in Detroit, and even Mr. Irving sometimes came out here to wait on her. She felt a costume was not complete without a hat, and nor was it complete without a pair of gloves. Mrs. Vining had been a teacher earlier, and after her try at the millinery business, she went back to teaching. Perhaps her adventure in selling and or making hats was a short one. Her name never appeared again in any of the directories. Sarah Mitchell opened a shop on Tuesday, September 27, 1881, in a partnership with a Miss Emery. It was advertised in the Wayne County Review, having a full line of fall millinery, embroideries, zevers, Germantown wools, ladies and children's wear, fancy good of all kinds. Edith and Millie Scheibel opened their shop in the Wilson Block at the southwest corner of McGraw and Park. In January of 1903, we believe that in 1903, period. I'm an amateur. We believe that after Mrs. Mitchell retired from the business, they were in the shop in the Meldrum building, where Ida Riley began her millinery and dress shop in the late 1920s. Although Ida Riley sold ready-made hats, she also made and trimmed hats herself, and was the last of the local milliners. Bonnets went out of style for a time, but in the 1870s they again were fashionable. And the 1880s hats, although not tied under the chin and sitting up high on the head, were still shaped very much like a bonnet. The tailored era of the 1890s brought the wide-brim, short-crown sailor hat. The 1940s will be remembered for the nearly flat hat, tilted forward over the forehead, showing curled hair underneath. The pillbox fad and the Empress Eugenie, the peach basket, and the turned-down brim had their day. And then there was a spring that a tiny flower hat appeared called a whimsy. Sometimes it was only a cluster of blossoms or one single large flower and a bit of veiling. It was a delicate, flimsy hat and definitely not a style becoming to every woman. I wonder how many women from the farms brought their eggs and butter to Bunting's store, getting an order in exchange to turn over to Mrs. Booth or Mrs. Mitchell for a spring hat bonnet. And so it was with the millinery shops in Wayne, and some of the hats we are about to show you may have been made by one or other of these particular milliners. One of our first models this evening is Elsie Fulford, who is wearing a black velvet lavender trim in front and also has black velvet ties. The lining of this hat is interesting. When you look the hats over on display after the show, I wonder if you might take note of this. It's different. This particular hat was donated by Mrs. Helen Stellwagen Crumley in 1969. Mrs. J. Stellwagen and Helen Taylor Stellwagen were the donors' grandparents. Many of you might know the Stellwagens. And now, let me introduce you to a nice speaker. Elsie Fulford will take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And welcome. So glad that we could have you all out here tonight. As you probably note in the book, we wanted to do a fashion show. And when we started digging into things we had in the attic, we found we had scads and scads of stuff. And we ended up knowing that we couldn't do it this quick, a full fashion show. So we decided to just sell on the hats. So, let's see if we can tickle some of your memory. We have a few men's hats, too, that I think will tickle you. This hat on our next model was Nelda Doletsky. Was from the Hudson's Woodward shops in the spring of 1962. It was bought there. It's made of white organza, edged with narrow gold braid. The donor of this hat was Mrs. Donald Hanchett, which you all know was the backbone behind this museum and the getting it started and that. She loved hats, evidently. We have quite a few, but I think that's very becoming now. Thank you. Our next model goes back a little ways. Not the model, but the hat. Gwen Mansell, and I might tell you that this is Jim and Nelda's daughter, Gwen, is wearing a red and white checked cotton sunbonnet. These were worn extensively back in the 1800s and early 1900s by the ladies to protect their skin from the sun's rays. I can remember my husband's grandmother, she wouldn't go out of the house without one on. Getting a suntan was definitely a no-no back then. And doctors today agree that they were probably right. We should wear sun protection for the sun when we work outside. The donor on this one is unknown, and we have some things here in the museum that very possibly came in with other things and got separated. So we don't know really who donated it, but it is a typical work-type sunbonnet. Thank you, Gwen. Next is her sister, Barbara Huseby, another of Nelda and Jim's daughters. She's going to work in a plain blue dust cap with blue and white dots on the ruffle. This opens out for washing and ironing. And, the women put these on and wore them when they were doing the housekeeping. It wasn't as easy to do your hair. Most people had long hair. You didn't wash it every day like we do now. And this kept you from getting dirty when you were doing your housework. This was once worn by Nellie Willett and donated by Mrs. Alice Hooks, sitting up here in the front row. In 1982, Alice gave this to me. I have a note on here that after World War I, the Willets settled in Wayne, and Mr. Willett was a carpenter, a wood finisher, and a painter from 1919 to 1930. Next we have Nelda again. This is updated a little bit more. She's modeling a pretty straw hat with a navy crown and a wide pink brim. It is trimmed with navy velvet ribbon and veiling, which is anchored at either side with clusters of pink flowers. This type of hat was fashionable in the early 50s and donated by Sarah Langworthy Larson to the museum in 1990. I think it's becoming to Nelda. I guess after going through all this, I wish we'd go back to hats and I have a lot of fun with this. This gentleman, I'm sure you all know, our Hank Gowdy, wearing a snappy straw hat. This one's belonged to his older brother, Otto Gowdy of Wayne, Hank's brother. Worn in the early 1900s, donated to the museum by Hank in 1990. He was telling us the other day we were doing this, that back, how long ago, Hank, when you went to the ball games, they on Labor Day, I guess it was, they had a straw hat day at the old Navin Field, and everyone threw their straw hats onto the field when anybody like hit a home run or made a real good play or something like that. Then they had to stop all the action while everybody went out and picked up all the straw hats. So I got rid of your straw hat. Next spring you could buy a new one. Glad that Otto didn't throw that one out. They said this was a custom of probably the late 20s and early 30s. I hadn't heard about that before. But I thought it was a cute idea. Next we have Nelda again. No, not yet. She's wearing a beautiful white fur hat, felt hat, I should say, with netting and an ornamented material up on the crown. And this also was donated to the museum by Sarah Langworthy Larson in 1990. This was probably worn in and around the 1950s. It seems to me, as I remember, I got out of school in 41, and I can remember still I can still remember, it was really neat to have a hat. You tried to coordinate a hat with your outfit. I don't know if I even own one anymore. But the pillbox type was very popular then. Gwen's bringing me a hat pin to see if I can find a hole in my head here somewhere to hook it on. Gwen is wearing a skull cap, and the proper name for this is a calotte. C-A-L-L-O-T-T-E. We even learned a few things while we were doing this. I could just see this with a beaded dress in the 20s during the Charleston. It's made of black net. It's trimmed with about 1.5 inch band of gold sequins. Originally worn by Eloise Kelly Dicher, I have a D-I-C-H-R, in the 1920s. The name is not familiar to me, but it was donated by her son, William Foster, to the museum in 1977. That's cute. Next we have her sister, Barbara Huseby, modeling a yellow beige straw hat trimmed with deeper shade of velvet ribbon. We all decided it would make a good coolie cap. We had a lot of laughs doing trying these on. And the label inside this hat reads Hudson Salon in Detroit. Donated by Mrs. Hanchett in 1969. From about the 1956 era. This hat is in very good condition, whether Mildred didn't wear it a lot or it just was made of good material that held up well.
Keeps your braids in cat.
That's really cute. Next we have James David Valensky wearing a white dress hat. Not knowing is right. The Art Allen Men's Store donated this to us in 1987. I believe it was brand new. It was probably made for special occasions, such as being elected to a high office in a club or in a groom board at his wedding or something on that order, but very stylish too. I have nothing. Okay, Melda again. I like this one. I like this really well. This is an orange felt hat with a high crown and grosgrain ribbon trim. And on the inside, it says it's an original Ken Blair exclusive from the fall of 1967. This was another one of Mrs. Hanchett's hats. And I love the colored material. We're going to have all of these laid out on the tables out here. And after you have your refreshments, or as you're having your refreshments, we want you to go out and take a look at them. You said your refreshments. We want you to go out and take a look at them. We said, like the inside of this one, the lining is pretty the outside. The way they really took a lot of care in the detail of the things that they made back in the old days. Much more so than we do now. Now we have Gwen modeling fancy lady hats from the 1920s. I can see her at a garden party with this lovely hat. We couldn't decide how you were supposed to wear it. We've had it on in all directions, and maybe some of you could tell us how you think it was like that? Yeah. Really? I still like to kind of cut them one side myself, but it's really pretty. The material in this is like a pale pink horsehair type of material. As I say, it could have been used for a bridal party or a member garden party or a summer garden party.
A summer wedding.
Summer wedding, yeah, beautiful. I think that's my favorite hat. This was also donated by Mrs. Sarah Langworthy Larson to the museum in 1990. Thank these people that have given these hats to the museum. I think it's just a wonderful way of remembering maybe a little better times. Now we have Barbara Huseby modeling a lovely Angora hat with burnt orange band. And this was purchased from the Francis shop, which I don't know where the Francis shop was. It doesn't say. This is the Francis shop. I believe that this belonged to Bessie Lenz.
Oh no, not a lens hat.
Here we got.
You're wearing it. Take it.
Barb works in the office over at Utes.
I should work at Lance.
I'm the wrong one wearing those.
When she found out the other day we had about 3 hats and they all ended up out here that came from Utes. I meant from Lynch. Barney tells us that he remembered about the hats. About the time that his mom bought a new hat was when they were going to a football game with the entire family in tow. Oh, darn, they don't get that dressed up to go to football games today, do they? Yeah. Heavy coats and stuff. Now I think we have Nalda coming next with a light blue small hat. We're wearing Nelda out. One of our models had to back out at the last minute, was ill. She's wearing this little blue hat made of silk flowers with light blue netting. This is the one that was called a whimsy type hat. I think that about the last hat I owned was one of those, and I liked it. There again, another style from the 50s. and donated by Sarah Langworthy Larson of Wayne in 1990. But I think those were cute. I had one something like that I got married in. Now, the resistance. Jim Walensky wearing a fur felt men's top hat. This style became very popular in the 1880s or 1890s. It's really shorter than the traditional top hat. I think we have one of the traditional ones in one of the museum cases. The stovepipe hat, which was worn by Abe Lincoln in the 1850s. This is also donated by Sarah Langworthy Larson, and I believe she told Virginia, who got ill and couldn't come tonight, that Sarah said that this hat was worn by her grandfather. So, but it's a beautiful hat. And now I'm going to turn this over to Jim and stall a little bit. I'm the next mom, and I'm going to get another hat on. Thank you.
I just don't feel right without a jacket on.
Gotta have your tails to go with that.
I feel like I'm half dressed, you know, like without a pair of gloves or without a hat on. The next hat that we have, we hope that maybe I can tell you a little bit about this particular hat that I'm wearing. A beaver hat was made in a sort of a peculiar fashion, maybe for some people today. They took the beavers and the pelts of the beaver, and they removed the coarse hairs of the beaver first, the outside fur that you normally see on a beaver, in order to get to this fine fur underneath. Scrape that off of the pelt or the leather skin, and then they carefully weighed it out, and they put it into a box, and if I can look here, into a hurl. And after they had it in the hurl, then they took a long gut string and they twanged it through the hurl in order to make the fur to cling, in order to make a nice mat for it. And then when they had this done, they would take this out, and then they placed a piece of linen just a little bit smaller than that particular mat that they had made, and then they made another one and placed it on top of it, pressed those two together, and that is what the hat is finally made from. Of course, there are many processes in between, one of them being the snatching of the pieces of felt out of a hot vat and placing it on the block, forming it into a crown hat, allowing it to dry sufficiently long enough, placed it on the block, then the block ran through a dye vat. The dye vat, then it was taken out of the dye vat and placed into a drying oven. After it was dried, it was trimmed. A band was put on the outside, the leather band on the inside, and also the band around the outside edge. Make it a finished hat. So that maybe that's why you can understand a little bit about the cost of a felt hat. We're ready now. Good. I can quit yakking. Our next model is Elsie Fulford, and she's modeling one of these things that's called a cloche. Did I get that right, cloche? Okay, cloche. Okay, that's a cloche. It's of varying shades of blue satin. Now, the label reads that it's an original Kathy from California. In 1962, it was a 1962 design, and it came from Hudson's Woodward Shop. Here knows where Woodward Shop was. Boy. This particular hat was donated by Mrs. Hanchett in 1969. The label on the next hat reads, Leslie James Hudson, The Woodward Shops. Our model is Gwen Manzel. It's a green felt trimmed with matching gross grain ribbon. Grown grain. Talking about printing, I could probably do all right, but talking about hat, I'm having a problem. It has a large flat button on the top that's also covered with matching trim, stitching. This particular hat was popular in the early 60s also, and this particular one was donated by Mrs. Hanchett. I wonder if you noticed that there's quite a few of them. I don't know how come, but we just went up there and started selecting hats, and quite a few from Mrs. Hanchett. Our next model, Elsie Fulford, has a small navy blue velour hat trimmed with matching satin piping. This style of woman's hat came into vogue after World War II, as the U.S. was trying to get back to quote-unquote normalcy. This particular hat was also made by Mrs. Hanchett in 1972. I think we got a glitch coming here. There's something went on this.
What is it I had to wear?
I should have worn yours
Well, excuse me, is wearing a blue pillbox trimmed with netting and iridescent feathers.
This is mine. I think
And it
so.
was, they called this peach bloom velour. Did I get that spelled right or get it wrong right? I'm not very good at women's hats. Probably from the 1950s. This particular hat was donated by Sarah Langworthy Larson. This black Stetson Derby, model here by Matt Mansell, was reportedly purchased from Mulholland's men's store in about 1925. Not quite so fast, Matt. They forgot what the beholder looked like. This particular hat was donated by Jim Gravengood in 1987. This hat, as you might remember, some of you might be old enough to remember that this hat was very popular in the late 1890s, and it actually survived until the snap brim hats of the 1920s and 1930s came into favor. I can remember my dad having one. It was, oh boy, when he finally threw it out, it was so thread-worn, but he did enjoy wearing that particular hat. We've got a model here that you might have seen once before. We've got Elsie Fulford coming now. Definitely a winter hat. It's a rust fur hat with narrow brown braided trim. It has two yellow stones, pins, that are stuck into the braid on the side. And this label also reads Hudson's Salon, Detroit. I don't know where that was. Anybody know what? This particular hat was made. I know where Hudson's was. This particular hat was made in France And it was from the era of around 1962 or 1963. And this particular model was donated again by Mrs. Hanchin. The next gentleman's hat was called a pork pie. Worn by Ben Huseby. There's that famous or infamous mother who was out here before. This particular hat, you might relate that style to the film Sound of Music. I don't remember the man's name, but he was the promoter of the show, and that particular show was set in Austria at the time that the Nazis were trying to take over in 1930, 33, somewhere along in there. This particular hat was donated by Mr. Art Allen, who just happens to be here with us this evening. Happy to see you here. You notice also, you might notice that I think either we are all growing up or something is happening to our population, because most of these hats are small on all of us. We're having a tough time we had to find a young fellow. You know, I might tell you, some of you people might have noticed that when I was in school, I was handsome. I was tall. My hair was dark.
It's you. You haven't got the big head.
I'm still tall. Not dark. Not too handsome anymore either. I used to be intelligent also. Bob Huseby is wearing a white straw hat with orange trim and a feather. But if you notice that little feather, it had a little bumblebee on it or something, but actually that isn't true. This is another one of those, can I mention?
Quietly.
John Lentz donated this hat.
Say Barney.
Barney, right. And the hat was purchased from Ernest Kern Company. Isn't that a beauty? It looks like it's a made of plastic, but it really isn't. Okay? You get that? Okay. Gwen is wiggling on this one. She thinks she's Carmen Miranda. She's wearing a lovely hat made of beige satin ribbon. 1/2-inch strips connected with a matching veil. I'm sorry. The label reads, again, that place that I don't know, the Woodward Shops at Hudson's. This particular hat was worn quite often from the time right after the World War II until about 61, 62. This particular hat also was donated by Mr. Hanchin. Here's that gal again. She's coming back again. Elsie is showing us black straw with a wide wavy brim and black silk bow on the top of the front of the brim.
There's a little stiff piece here in the middle that just holds it right in your hand.
I don't know, the front row might have seen it, but it says that the label in this hat also said J.L. Hudson Company, Detroit. This particular hat appears to be from the 40s or the 50s era.
Keep the sun off.
And it's another one of those that was donated by Mrs. Hanchin.
Where's the handle?
This one is a little bit different. Mansell, who's wearing a Boy Scout hat. It was donated to the museum by Mrs. George Hess in 1964. Some of you longtime members of the society might remember that Mrs. George Hess was one of the founding charter members of the society, and it was because of her and a few of the other people that we have a museum like we have today. The American Scout movement was brought to the United States by a Chicago publisher, William E. Boyce. The National Council was founded on February 8, 1910. The Scout movement was actually originated in England by Sir Robert Baden-Powell, and this hat was worn by the Scouts until the late 1940s. Some of you might have been in the Scout troops at that time, in the 1940s, or you might have had boys who belonged there, and it just happened that one of our commissioners, Bob Little, was a scoutmaster for quite a while there. And before George Hess Jr. left the scouting movement, he did become an Eagle Scout. And at that particular time, that style of hat was changed into what we call the overseas hat, or one that could be worn on your belt or in your epaulets. The next hat, is this another one of those? No, this is a different one. Okay. This hat worn by Barb Shrewsbury is really a small bonnet. It's a black shell covered with pleated black material and has black ribbon ties. Some of you might have remembered your mother wearing one of these hats. This one belonged to Mary Fuller Cady, who was wife of Colette, I believe it is, Colette Cady, who was the grandmother of the donor, Mrs. Donald Ryder. And I might, those of you who don't remember Cady, or Cady Corners, or Cady School, Colette Cady married Mary Fulham, owned a farm east of Wayne Road at the corner of the road now known as Marquette. He had 5 daughters: Ellen Cady Wright, Eva Cady Smith, Viola Cady Cady, Bessie Cady Smith, and Bernice Cady Lane. All of them are deceased now. But you might also take note that Mrs. Eva Smith was the mother of Clyde Smith. And I don't think anybody around here has ever been to Clyde Smith and bought some vegetables. He had that huge farm there. Well, Clyde might be gone, but everything is still there. And we might remember also that Cady Smith, Bessie Cady, was one of the school teachers at the Cady School way back when it was a one-room school. And along with Barb's, her sister, Gwen Manzo, is wearing a flat black bonnet trimmed with folded satin fabrics. Ties were made of velvet ribbon. Please take note of the lining of this hat when you look at the hats on display later. These 2 hats, you see them here, were probably known as mourning hats. They're black, small, ladies' hats, and were worn for quite a while after the death of their husband. These 2 hats are probably the older hats that we have here in the museum collection. And it was the one that Gwen is wearing is probably donated along with another hat donated at the same time, and it may have been one owned by Helen Taylor Stellwagen. We're not sure on that. We're going to take a long, hard look at that one later on, after we get them putting them back into the places where they belong. It's very, very difficult sometimes to trace these things after they come separated from the numbers. But believe me, we've got the numbers here, and we've got very good indications and so forth that these particular two hats are from the same donor, from Helen Crumley. They were from the from that same Mrs. Crumley. We think. We're not sure. We're going to check that out. The next hat we have here is really not a hat, I guess. It is? It is? Yes. Is it? All right, okay. This is a nightcap. Normally worn by ladies when they were going to bed so that they wouldn't mess up their hair. Also so that they wouldn't catch cold at night. Because, you know, we had central heating at that time. Centrally located right in the fireplace downstairs in the great room. If you'll notice also, she has in the front of her hair, maybe you ought to come back through and show the hair curler that was in vogue at that particular time. It's a piece of leather strap with a piece of wire inside. You would take and roll your hair up in that, and then turn the leather ends over to hold the thing in place. That particular hair curler did not come with the hat, but we thought it would be nice to let you know, along with this particular hat. Now, this particular hat also became separated from the other hat, and we're not exactly sure, but there is a nightgown up in the bed area up here that just may belong together. But we're going to have to check the material, check another nightgown that we have, to check the material on that one, check all of the extra portions or things that go along with it to make sure, and it may be such a thing that we do know who this particular thing came from. We're sorry that we have to report it's unknown at this time. We come with this, the same, yeah, that's her. The same, Elsie Fulford again, modeling a very, very beautiful summer hat, green scarf, trimmed with deep rose-colored cabbage roses and white tulip. This hat was just recently donated here to the museum in '91, but it is not a new hat. This was by Saritha Rubel-Moore, just donated in 1991, but it is not a new hat. Isn't that a beauty? I mean the hat.
Both, Jim, both.
Our next hat is by Barb Hughesby, and this is another one of those donated by John. What was his name again?
I can't pronounce.
Okay. Barb's wearing this brown, gold, orange, and beige tapestry hat and is carrying a matching handbag.
And
This
it may not be
particular
found
hat
in the museum after I leave.
was purchased from Ernst Kern. Whoever that is.
money in it.
And it was sometime in the early 50s or in the late 50s or early 60s. I think it's a very stunning hat.
Yeah, I think it may not be in the museum after tonight.
Okay. The last hat, the one that I really would like to have worn myself, but that's okay. He bears the same name as I. This particular hat is worn by James David Delatsky. It's a brown men's Stetson, also called the St. Regis. This type of hat was very popular with the Dapper Dans in the West, when us Nahapanas. and us Easterners were running around wearing derbies. Now, I think I would rather have been a Westerner than wearing a hat like that than wearing a derby. But then, who knows? Maybe the derby was a better hat. This particular hat was donated also by Art Allen, formerly of Allen's men's store here in Wayne. That concludes our live models for this evening. We hope that you enjoyed the program. We also displayed, especially of those, I know that you marked your program, and take note of those that have the different style of lining in them. And I think that you could take a little bit of look at all of them, because there are some very, very beautiful hats. What we've done here this evening is try to show you a representative sample of the hats that were here in the museum. There are about 15 of them that are on permanent display here, and they are also listed when we've tried to show you or tell you where they are. For instance, the first hat is displayed in Showcase X1. That's over here on this side over here. And we tried to describe where they were so that you would have an opportunity to go around and see where they are. One of the things that we know that you, I hope that you appreciate the work that has gone into this type of a show. And if you enjoy it, we hope that you would tell the staff, museum staff, that you like it. And you would also let us from the commission know. I see I've got two people here that would like to say something here. Then after that, I would like to, one more thing to do.
If you explain what the check marks are for, that's what I want you to do.
Okay, the check marks are that somebody has gone around and made sure that the description fits as closely as possible where the hat is. That's it was, and because we did this on the Xerox machine here in the museum, all we did was ran off what we had. Sandra.
I'd just like to say that I thought the show was very interesting and very educational, and I think you all deserve a round of applause.
We're going to invite all of the models back in.
We'll do it again.
And then, if you would, there's one other person who really deserves a lot of credit for all of the things that have gone on. The gal who kept us all straight, who matched the people with the cards that we were going to read and kept things flowing nicely, that's Ruth Taylor. And Ruth was also the one who did the decorating of the table and so forth. She told my wife and told this one and that one, and I believe she got the bouquet somewhere also from... No, my girlfriend. Your girlfriend made it for you. Okay, that's what I thought. She tried to decorate everything in red and white for us, and I think that she did a wonderful job. To the rest of the commission members who had coffee and cookies for us this evening. I must say I am very much relieved to get this over with. It's like an awful strain out
Keep watching. I'll show you. I'll show you how to do it. Look at it.